I loved my girlfriend in real life, but her social media personality was destroying our relationship, so I unfollowed her on everything, and what she did next ended our entire relationship in one night. I unfollowed my girlfriend on every platform on a Sunday afternoon, and by Monday morning she had done something so deliberate, so calculated, and so perfectly consistent with everything I had been trying to tell her for 2 years that I sat at my kitchen table reading it and understood, in the way that final pieces of a picture arrive, that I had my answer. Not the answer I had been hoping for. The answer the information required. The difference between those two answers is where the 2 years lived, and where they ended, and what I have been carrying since. Not an impulsive decision. Not a fight that spiraled. A Sunday afternoon and 2 years of something building toward a single moment of clarity about the gap between the woman I loved and the performance she delivered to 400,000 strangers, and what happened when those two things occupied the same relationship without either of us ever fully naming what that cost. Her name is Sofia. We had been together for 2 years when the Sunday arrived. She had been building her platform for 4 years before I met her, the sustained careful work of someone who has identified an audience and learned exactly what that audience wants and has been delivering it with increasing precision. She was good at it. I want to say that clearly because what I am about to tell you is not a story about someone who was bad at what she did. She was excellent at what she did. She understood her audience with an intimacy that comes from years of close attention, and she produced content consistently, and the consistency had built 400,000 people who trusted her voice on the topics she covered. Her topics were relationships and authenticity. What she offered her audience was the version of herself that said the true thing other people were afraid to say. Her brand, and I use that word with the weight it deserves, was honesty. Unfiltered. Raw. The presentation of a life more real than the curated life, which was itself a curation, just an invisible one. I did not understand this when we met. I came to her content gradually, the way you come to your partner's work when their work is a central part of their identity, and I watched videos and read posts and understood across the watching and reading that there was a Sofia who lived in our apartment and a Sofia who existed for 400,000 people, and that the two shared qualities and diverged on others. The divergence was the thing. What the divergence contained was the thing. The Sofia in our apartment was warm and particular, and the person I had been falling in love with across 2 years of mornings and ordinary evenings and the accumulating dailiness of a shared life. She was funny in the private way of someone whose humor is for the people who actually know her. She was vulnerable in the real way of someone who lets you see the parts that are not performing. She was, in the full felt sense of the word, present. The Sofia for 400,000 people was also warm. Also particular. Also, in the presentation, vulnerable. The difference was in the material. The material for the audience was us. Not with names and identifying details and the careless exposure of someone who does not understand privacy. With the precise skill of someone who understood exactly how much to reveal and how to reveal it to produce the response she was looking for. Our arguments became content about navigating conflict in relationships. Our good moments became content about what real intimacy looks like. My behaviors, things I did or said or struggled with, became the unnamed examples in videos about what to look for or what to avoid in a partner. I was the unnamed partner. The source material. The real relationship underneath the content about real relationships. I found this out gradually. Not in a single revelation. In the accumulating way of someone assembling a picture from pieces that arrive one at a time over a long period. A comment on a video that described something I recognized. A detail in a post drawn from a moment I remembered clearly. A response in my own life that had been subtly shaped by something processed for content before it was processed with me, so that when I came to Sofia with the real version I was receiving a response that had already been rehearsed for an audience. I talked to her about it once, early. I said I had noticed some of our life appearing in her content and asked how she thought about where the line was. She said she was always careful about privacy, that the content came from her own experience and perspective, that the relationship was never the point even when it was the context. I received that answer. Filed it. Continued. But what I had filed stayed with me. It was there 6 months later when I watched a video in which she described a fight we had had. The details changed enough to be deniable but the shape exactly as it had been, and I watched 400,000 people receive her version of our argument without my version being present, and I felt something I did not have a word for. Not anger. The hollow of someone who has understood that their private life has been processed for public consumption and that the processing happened before the private conversation about the private thing was finished. She had made content about our argument before we had resolved the argument. The audience had received her version while I was still inside the experience her version was describing. I talked to her again. More directly. I said I had seen the video and recognized the argument and needed to understand the timing. She said the content was about her experience, not about me, that she needed to be able to process her life through her work, that this was something she had been doing for 4 years and was part of who she was. I said I understood it was part of who she was. I said I needed it to not include the unresolved versions of our private conflicts. I said finished arguments were different from ongoing ones. She said she understood. The next video went up 2 days later. A different topic. Nothing I recognized. I told myself the conversation had produced something. Filed the relief. Continued. The material kept appearing. I watched her content across the following months with a divided attention I could not turn off. The content and the source of the content. I became very good at identifying which pieces came from our life. Better than the audience, who were receiving a curated version. I was receiving the curation with full knowledge of what it was drawn from. Across those months I noticed something. The Sofia for the audience was consistently certain. She had positions and delivered them with the fluency of someone who has never been uncertain about what the right answer is. The Sofia in our apartment was not consistently certain. She had doubts and complications and the honest uncertainty of someone actually living inside something rather than commenting on it from the outside. The audience got the certain version. I got the uncertain version. The uncertain version was the real one. The certain version was the content. I did not say anything else about it. Not because I had accepted it. Because I understood that saying something else was going to produce the same response and the response was not going to change anything and the not changing of anything was itself information. The information kept accumulating alongside the rest of it. The Sunday arrived on a morning when I had been watching a video she had posted the previous evening. A video about what it means to truly know another person. Warm, articulate, saying things that were true about knowing people. Also drawn, in the unmistakable way I had become fluent at recognizing, from a conversation we had had earlier that week. A private conversation about something I was going through that I had shared with her in the trust of someone letting their partner know them. The conversation had been about me. My struggle. My uncertainty. She had listened. She had been present. She had been the Sofia in the apartment. Then she had made a video about it for 400,000 people without telling me she was going to and without asking if that was okay, and the video was titled something about what it means to truly know someone, and it had been built from a conversation in which I had let her know me. I sat with the video for a long time. Not with anger. With the cold clarity I described at the beginning. The clarity of someone who has been accumulating something for a long time and who has finally understood what the accumulation was building toward. I had been accumulating the knowledge that the relationship I was in had an audience. That the intimacy I had been experiencing had been, alongside the experiencing, content. That the privacy I believed existed between us was privacy on my side and material on hers. Not because she was a bad person. Because the line between her life and her content had been dissolving for 4 years before I arrived, and I had arrived into a situation where the dissolution was already complete, where what I was offering as intimacy she was receiving as both intimacy and material simultaneously, without being able to separate the two functions anymore, because for her they had never been separate. I unfollowed her on every platform on that Sunday afternoon. Not as a statement. Not as punishment. As the necessary act of someone who has understood that watching the content version of his relationship while living the real version had been creating a fracture in his understanding of what the relationship was, and that the fracture was costing him something he could not keep paying. I did not tell her. I unfollowed and put my phone down and went for a long walk and thought about what I was going to say when she noticed. She noticed in 4 hours. She did not come to me. What she did instead was what I read at 7 in the morning on Monday at my kitchen table, and that I understood the moment I saw it with the complete clarity of someone receiving the final piece of information needed to see the full picture. She had posted. Not about the unfollow by name. She was too skilled for that. What she had posted was a question to her audience. Carefully framed. Not about me and entirely about me. 400,000 people were going to read it as a genuine inquiry into a universal experience. I was going to read it as what it was. The question was, when someone removes themselves from your world without explanation, what does that tell you about them? By 7 in the morning the post had 4,000 responses. I sat at the kitchen table and read enough of them to understand the shape of what was happening. Engaged. Articulate. People sharing their own experiences with the warmth of an audience that trusts the person asking. People validating the position embedded in the question, which was that the removing was a reflection of something lacking in the person who had done it. 4,000 people who did not know me were building an account of my character based on a question designed to produce exactly that account. I put the phone face down on the table. I sat in the stillness of someone who has just had the final piece arrive. The final piece was this. She had not come to me. She had not knocked on the bedroom door and said, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" or "I noticed something and I want to understand." She had taken the unfollow directly to her audience. In real time. While I was asleep. Framed in the way of someone who knows exactly how to produce the validation she needed from the people who reliably produce it for her. The unfollow had become content before it had become a conversation. That was the pattern. That had always been the pattern. Everything I had been accumulating for 2 years had been accumulating toward this single clear understanding. She processed her life for her audience before she processed it with the people in her life. Not as a conscious choice she was making and could unmake. As the way she operated. The audience was where she processed. I was where she lived. And the living had been consistently subordinated to the processing in every moment that mattered. She came out of the bedroom at 8 carrying her phone. She said, "You unfollowed me." I said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because watching the content version of our relationship while living in the real one had been fracturing my understanding of what we actually were, and I needed to stop." She said, "The content version." I said, "The certain version. The processed version. The version that takes our private moments as source material and delivers them to your audience shaped for response." I have been watching that version while living the original, and the gap between them has been costing me something I cannot keep paying. She said, my content is real. I said, your content is a version. The version that has been edited and shaped and delivered for a particular effect. The real version is what happens in this apartment before the editing. I have been living the real version and watching the edited one go out, and the two have not matched for a long time. She said, I have never claimed to be unedited. I said, your brand is authenticity. The unfiltered version. The real talk. What you offer is a presentation of realness, and the presentation is itself a construction. I understand that is what content creation is. That is not my objection. She said, then what is? I said, the conversation I had with you this week about what I have been going through. That was real. That was me letting you know me. You made a video from it without asking. Without telling me. Without finishing the conversation with me before starting the content version of it. I was still inside the thing you made content about. She said, I protected your privacy. I said, you protected my name. My experience was in the video. Processed and delivered to 400,000 people while I was still living inside it. Protecting my identity is not the same thing as protecting my privacy. She said, I've been creating like this for 4 years. You knew this when we met. I said, I knew you had a platform. I did not understand that being with you meant being material for it. I came to understand that gradually, and I spoke to you about it, and you adjusted briefly and returned to the pattern, and I kept adjusting my own expectations to accommodate it because I loved the version of you in this apartment and kept telling myself that version was the whole thing. She said, it is the whole thing. I said, then who posted at 11:47 last night? She went still. I said, I unfollowed you. You did not come to me. You did not ask what was happening. You posted. You took what happened between us and gave it to your audience before you gave it to me. That is the answer. Your content is real. The question is which reality it belongs to. She said, I needed to process. I said, I know. Your processing is public. I understand that. I am telling you that being the subject of public processing is something I cannot continue to be. She said, you cannot ask me to stop creating. I said, I am not asking you to stop. I am telling you what I cannot continue to be inside. She said, those are the same thing. I said, only if the content requires me as material. Does it? She said nothing for a long time. The silence of someone running a calculation that is producing an answer they do not want to deliver. She said, my content is about relationships and authenticity. You are my relationship. The content comes from the relationship. That is how it has worked. I said, I know. She said, I cannot make the content without the relationship being part of it. I said, I know. She said, so. I said, so we have found the thing. The content requires the relationship as material, and I cannot be material anymore. Those two facts together tell us something. She said, that it is over. I said, I think they tell us that the relationship has been shaped by the content requirements in ways neither of us fully named, and the shaping has been underneath everything I have been trying to say for 2 years. She said, you are saying I used you. I said, I am saying the content needed a real relationship as its source, and I was the real relationship, and the needing changed the shape of what we were without either of us saying it out loud. I am saying that is the truth underneath 2 years. She sat down. The sitting of someone whose body has made a decision before the rest of them has caught up. She looked at her hands. She said, I love you. I said, I know. She said, the apartment version. I said, yes. She said, that is real. I said, I believe you. She said, but. I said, but the apartment version has not been able to exist without the content version alongside it. The apartment is always also the source. The intimacy is always also material. I cannot unsee that. I have been seeing it for 2 years and choosing to file it because I loved what we had in here, and I kept hoping the in here was enough. She said, what did you need? I said, I needed you to come to me last night instead of posting. I needed the unfollow to become a conversation between us before it became a question for your audience. I needed to be where you process this. I was not your instinct. She said, I can work on that. I said, I believe you can work on it. I have watched you work on it. The working produces changes, and then the instinct returns, and I have run out of capacity to wait for the instinct to change. She said, you have already decided. I said, last night decided. I am just telling you what it decided. She said, the post. I said, not its existence. Its timing. Before the conversation. That was the information I could not give myself. She said, I am sorry. I said, I know. She said, I did not understand what I was doing. I said, I did not tell you completely until now. That is partly mine. She said, why didn't you? I said, because telling you completely meant arriving here. I loved you and I was not ready. She said, and now? I said, now I've been at this table since 7 reading 4,000 responses to a question I did not consent to be the answer to, and I am ready because the information made me ready. We sat in the apartment for 2 more hours. Not with dramatic finality. With the human weight of two people who loved each other sitting with the distance between what they had been and what they were now and what that distance contained. At some point she said, "The post is still up." I said, "I know." She said, "I should take it down." I said, "That is yours to decide." She said, "It was not fair." I said, "No." She took it down. I do not know what she told her audience. I unfollowed her 2 years ago and have stayed unfollowed, a choice I maintain because it is the choice that allows me to know the accurate version of myself rather than the content version of someone who was once in a relationship with me. I moved out across the following 2 weeks. We were decent to each other through it. Not easy. Decent. She called once, 3 months later. She said she had started working with a therapist on the pattern of processing publicly before processing privately. She said she was not calling to change what had happened. She called because she wanted me to know she had heard me. I said, "Thank you for telling me." She said, "Is that all?" I said, "I think so. Yes." She said, "Okay." I said, "I hope the work is going well." She said, "It is hard." I said, "The real versions usually are." She said, "Yes." We said goodbye. The clean goodbye of two people on the other side of something real who are not trying to extend what has already ended. I think about the Sunday Unfollow sometimes. Not with regret. With the understanding of someone who had an instinct, followed it, and received from following it the final piece of information needed to see something completely. The instinct was right. The information was accurate. The decision the information produced was the correct decision. Some people live in two realities simultaneously. The private one and the public one. When you are in a relationship with someone who lives that way, you are living in both whether you chose to or not. The question is whether you can exist in both without the public one consuming the private one that you actually chose. For 2 years I told myself I could. Sunday told me I could not. Monday confirmed it. The unfollow was the smallest possible act. 1 button. 4 platforms. A few seconds of one afternoon. What it revealed was 2 years of information that had been building toward a single clear picture. The picture was complete. I looked at it. And I made the decision the picture required. Not the decision I wanted to make. The decision the information produced. Those are different decisions. And when the information arrives clearly enough to produce its own decision, your only job is to receive it honestly. Know what you are actually living in. Name it accurately to yourself before anything else. And when the instinct comes, the one that tells you to stop watching the performance and start seeing what is underneath it, follow it. Even when it costs you something. Especially then. Because what it shows you will always be worth more than what you were spending to avoid seeing it. The performance was real. The relationship was real. The gap between them was the information. I received it. And I have been living in the real version ever since.